All right, and we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Manny Bernabe Show. I am your host, Manny Bernabe, and on the show, we try to cover AI, machine learning, business, Industry 4.0, but we try to keep it at a managerial level or an executive layer or level. So I don't feel like you need to be a technical person to enjoy these conversations. Today's show is sponsored by our newsletter, the Manny Bernabe Show newsletter. If you want to get a short note every week highlighting some of the things that I've been thinking about around AI, machine learning, Industry 4.0. This week it's been about all about digital twins in preparation for my interview today. But I also write about physics-based models, machine learning-based models, things that might be relevant for AI in Industry 4.0. So sign up for that newsletter. That's at gomannybernabe.com/newsletter. Sign up when you have a moment. Okay, so I'm really excited for our show today. We have a very special guest on the show. We have the author of Reconnaissance and IoT data processing with Palantir Foundry, Kai Alstaedt. He's joining us today to talk about digital twins. We're going to talk about the business value of digital twins, the challenges to implementing them, and some of the tools that he likes in terms of implementing digital twins, in particular Palantir Foundry, which I know there's a lot of interest around. So with that, let me welcome Kai to the show. Hey, Kai, how's it going?
Hello, Manny. Yeah, perfect.
Oh,
Really looking forward to our conversation.
yes, absolutely, Kai. Thanks for coming on the show. Kai, I wonder if we can start the conversation by talking about the business value of digital twins. Why is this such a hot topic? I feel like everyone's covering this, everybody's interested in this. Where's the value for users, for companies that are trying to put this into production?
Mhm. At first, maybe a little middle look on the term of the digital twin. When you ask 10 people, you get 11 definitions.
Right.
But when you go down to the nucleus that I've found, which is common for all kind of definition, is the sort of representation of the reality in a digital system, more or less. This is where everyone concludes, and it should be as actual as possible. So, what's the value? I come to it a little bit later when we think about levels of insights, but basically, a digital twin shall answer you the W question. So, what, where, when, who, why, and this is the ultimate base for decision making. So, implementing a digital twin shall give you a sound foundation for decision making. What to do now? What to do next? Do I have to tackle a problem which is visible in the digital twin, or looking on the long term to a digital twin to what have been the problems in the past? Where do I have some hotspots? And yes, a little bit around this levels of insight. It's worth to think. You had in the past show as well a colleague who distincted the IoT data into 7 levels, and this is an approach that I really like. So everything is around events in the digital twin. So you try to capture events either with IoT devices, or you get some predefined data about events in the world and the assets to which this happens, to which the events happen. So when you think of the lowest level of digital twin data, you have some raw data. So you say a sensor A is at value 42 at 1345. With
Right.
this kind of information, you can create already business value. When you have some people who are interested, when this sensor reaches a threshold or when this sensor talks to you, you can simply put a mail daemon on the sensor, push out the mail, and the person who knows what this means can add some value. He says, yes, 42, I know what this means. But the contextualization happens between the brain, between the ears of the person. So when you try to move this on a higher level, you derive and norm the context. So you know that the sensor A is maybe attached to the drilling station D1, and you know as well that this sensor value 42 might be a distance or a certain angle of something, means that the production batch finished. So by simply mapping the values and the source of these raw events, you can get to a far better level of insight to say, okay, at 1345, the drilling station finished work. And then by just transforming the data, you can as well compare other. You have maybe 4 drilling stations spread over the area, and these 4 drilling stations tell you they are now ready. And one is at angle 42 ready, and the other one might be ready at station 50. But from a semantic perspective, all of this is the same. The drilling station finished its work. And then when you get as well one level higher, you can add some external context data. So you know, maybe you have some planning data from SAP. And so you know, okay, at this point of time, it's lot number 4711, which is currently in the drilling station. And so by adding even more context to this data, you can derive far higher level knowledge or information. So it's the transformation from data into information. So you know, okay, at 1345, the lot 4711 has been finished in the drilling station. And this gives you additional information and insight. And when you have put this into this level of information, you can start to compare and put into context and compare. You say the planning to be finished was at 1340, but now it actually finished at 1345, 5 minutes late. So by adding more and more context, you can create even higher insights and generate more added value by this. Because
I really like that. That makes a lot of sense. And I'll just pause and say, hey, folks, we are live. The benefit of that is that you get to ask questions. You get to drop your comments in the chat. So if you have a question, drop it in there. You have a comment, you want to drop it in there. So I really like that, Kai. I think you're right. The definition is all you get a number of different definitions. I really like the notion of making sure that if you're talking about digital twin, you're making sure that it's specific to a particular machine, that it's personalized for that machine. It's not just a generic physics-based model. So I've seen that too. It incorporates the real life aspects of that machine. I like the fact that you're talking about the W's, the what, when, where. That's what's going to be answered by the digital twin. And this framing here of the different layers, starting with raw data, adding context. So you start with raw sensor data, but then you map that to a location, and then you create an event. And that's ultimately what an operator cares about, right? The operator cares if whether or not a batch of work got done. That's an event, and you're transforming all of this raw data into that semantic appreciation that can be appreciated by an operator and can help them take actions. Because I think you mentioned that the fact that this is all helping us make decisions, and that's an operator that has to do that. Is that fair?
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly as you said. It's making decisions and transform data into information that gives you the sound base for decision making.
And so that makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering, where do you see the biggest pain points and challenges in getting that up and running? We talked about stitching all these different data sources together. So you have to pull in data from your ERP system, from your OT layer, from the telemetry data. You have to normalize it. I'm guessing that's where the big pain point comes in, or what do you think? What do you think? What's keeping companies from having a great experience with implementing digital twin technology?
From my surrounding, I see the biggest challenge in unfortunately getting this data from the sensors, because these sensors you talk to people and say, why don't you put just a Raspberry onto the top of the jig and then everything is cool? But to have a industrialized way of collecting this data, that you have these IoT devices hardened and temperature resistant, to get them into your corporate network, to have a managed and controlled way of data collection and put this into the good network layers, network spaces, and get then the data to the point where the sensitive data is. Because when you want to connect it with SAP data, it somehow have to be put together. At least This is from my past experience one of the biggest challenge to grab this low-level sensor data. And the second part is that you handle reality. This is awful for us IT people then when reality data comes in. So sensors may have outages, or the light is in the wrong direction, or the wind, a door opened, and then you don't have good data. But things happen, but you don't have the good data from the sensor, and this is something that is really a challenge. And before coming to the first questions, as well, the area where the data is put to. So either you have your fancy IoT platform, which is optimized to grab these streams of data, or you have your data analytics platform where all the context data, all the ERP data, all the data comes together, and to somewhere you have to shift the data. And yes, this is a decision. Either you put all the stuff into your IoT platform from ERP, security data breaches is something tricky, or you have to have this mass amount of data into your analytics platform, which is as well a challenge.
Got it. That makes sense. So getting access to the sensor data, making sure that you have the right readings, because if you got to measure the inside of a steel furnace, that data can be kind of tricky to get. You got to make sure that it's in line with what you expect in the reality. So look for anomaly readings in your data, and then the decision in terms of where you're going to park all of this data, where you're gonna store it, and where you're going to be doing the analytics.
Yeah.
Very neat. That makes sense. And the companies that are doing this well, that where they have great experience with digital twin, what are they getting out of it? What, or I guess, how are they implementing it, and what are they doing well? What's helping them implement this faster within their organization and get the value from digital twin? Any context there?
In many areas that I saw, it's still at this notification level, so that people are just informed what's happening. This level to say I gain a higher level insight and maybe do a machine learning based on events of the combination of events which are currently in the space of observation. This is something which is really something which is on the later steps, but the first steps is already lots of generated value just by monitoring and knowing what's happening. Here's some interesting question from Dima D. This example for an industrial context. How does this digital twin apply to a bunch of workload done various software platforms, may include a Salesforce? Brilliant question, and this is something that leads us into the area of the Palantir Foundry. Because the Foundry is exactly this system which is designed from its base, from its principle, to gather and merge these kinds of different workflows and data sources. It's simply made for it, that you have the Foundry, you ingest the data from your Salesforce system, from your SAP system, and from a third party, from your IoT sensors, and then you can exactly derive and tell the story and form this data pipeline that can do exactly this. I personally, working at a larger company, I'm dealing mainly with this higher level insights. So some guys sitting close to me, they are looking at the sensors, and in my 9 to 5, I'm usually working with this higher level, where I usually do not care too much about angle 42, but rather about job done, planning event reached, something like this.
Got it. That makes sense. I want to come back to the Palantir Foundry aspect and what makes it unique. And we're going to talk more about your book for sure. Can you talk to us a little bit about your background, Kai? You mentioned your 9 to 5. Tell us about that. Tell us about your experience and working with different digital twin technologies, and how you got to the point of writing this great book.
Yes, so I'm working at a large aircraft manufacturer in Europe. So then it's more or less clear where I'm here. And I have a information science background. So you see, hair is a little great. I'm close to 50, and I'm doing this stuff with database and programming since 30 years. And but databases had been always an area of passion for me. And so I'm in the digitalization area, and this is something which is currently, since a longer time already, something fashion. And I was more or less, by accident, I went into the Foundry area. So a colleague came, Kai, you're doing now digitalization stuff. You have to look at our Foundry instance, which is one of the biggest, as far as I heard. Yes, and then I step into the Foundry, and it's an interesting and amazing piece of software. And so yes, and so we create, or I create these digital twins for different areas. I have as well a longer heritage of experience, and when we look into the civil area with these sensor data processes, then it's something like Reconnaissance. It has a strong resemblance to the Reconnaissance area, where you have this kind of signal processing as well. You help up your antenna into the air, listen to the electromagnetic frequency spectrum, and then you try to derive a picture and abstraction of the world outside. And this is more or less, from a technical perspective, the same than getting some sensor data from a Raspberry mounted on a jig. So this is something where the connection is, and where this area of interest for me, the reconnaissance area, came into the game. And I took this as a use case to tell the story of the digital twin.
Awesome, very neat. Can we talk a little bit about, first of all, let's give people an overview of Palantir Foundry, because not everyone is going to be familiar with it. And the way that I would describe it is it's the commercial offering by Palantir that historically has been more focused on government, but recently has moved into the commercial space. And this is sort of their data platform, meant to help companies wrangle all these different data sources and workflows, put them all in one place, and make it easier for them to create valuable applications like digital twins, for example. How else would you describe Palantir Foundry for folks that may not be familiar with the product?
Yes, it's more or less as you said. It's a cloud-based system which is designed to handle large streams and sets of data. So yes, the idea is that you ingest data, that you get, these are put into data sets. So this is the basic interface, and the baseline for the Foundry is a data set. And then you transform, and this is something which is really different compared to other systems, that you simply do not do SQL queries on your data, but you transform the data step by step to your use case. And this is a principle that I never saw in this way before. And yes, and you transform data set to data set and data set and converge to your use case. It feels a little bit sometimes like Excel. So it's really strange. You have your initial table, and then you add the first helper column, then the second helper column, then the third helper column, and then the next sheet you add a pivot table, then you transform it, and then one sheet later you do some other transformation with the data. And this kind of very visual and process driven way of implementing things is implemented in the Foundry in a very excellent way, and in a very secure way. So this is as well interesting to see how security is really the sort of a foundation of the platform, that once the data is tagged being of a special visibility, then all this is going through the entire platform, so all usages of this data. And this makes things quite interesting, because when you have, for example, a sensor which is in a sensitive area, that where the information about the sensor might not be exposed, then you can control this in a very good and clever way. And on top of this area of data set, where you have a really table-like way of working with the data, they stack the principle of an object layer, they call ontology, and then you move from this mass data in the table form to identities. So you say the event is no longer a row in a table, but rather an object with properties, with links to other things. And these objects, they work in different applications. So a map, when an object is declared to be a geospatial object, then the map application knows that it can display the thing on a map. And other applications which are based on these object level, they can work and interact with these objects. So
And
yeah.
sorry, and I think you three great points. And if you have some more, I'm happy to talk about them. But the step-by-step workflow, and
Yeah.
I'm a former data scientist, and so I can appreciate that because the data science process is really, you start with raw data, you take a summary, you clean it, you create a function, you add that as a new row, then you take a sample of that. It's very sort of step-by-step iterative until you
Mhm.
get to the final output, which is usually like a simple statistic that is what you're looking for, right? And it seems like you're saying that Palantir Foundry, that's the way it's designed to be used as sort of this iterative step by step. You're slowly stacking the value and the context, kind of how you described it at the beginning of our talk in terms of the digital twin, is slowly adding the context to that raw data to make it valuable. You're essentially mining that raw data
Yeah.
to create something valuable at the end of it, just like you would mine or process petroleum to get gasoline. There's a similar workflow that has to happen with raw data to get it to insights. And then security is a big one. I think that's another key selling point of Palantir Foundry from what I'm seeing. Oftentimes with data science, we have to share certain insights, we have to share certain data stores, but some of that data is sensitive and not everyone can see it. And but how do you manage that in the right way? You can't be sending around spreadsheets and reports. So it seems like there's a better way to do that within Palantir Foundry. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Maybe access control within Palantir Foundry. How would I, as a data scientist, feel comfortable sharing like a notebook or something with somebody else that maybe doesn't have the rights to see everything that I'm seeing, for example?
To be honest, it's very I do not notice this for me in my 9 to 5. It's really a problem of other people. So my colleagues, they put in the data, they put the data with a good rights into the source in the first step into Foundry, and then it's tagged like the data. And so I use this data, transform it, and I simply can rely that it's not exposed to people who should not see. Sometimes it happens that I get some coworker and says, Kai, I cannot see the data. Why don't I have access? Can you grant me access? And I say, no, I can't. I can't, because the invisibility of the data is built into the platform, and I cannot modify the platform. And this is for me really convenient, because I know that the Foundry takes care of the visibility of the data, and those who should not see, they cannot see. And when they want to see, I know that they have to talk to our legal people, and then they sign the good NDA, get the good clearance, and then they are slotted into some group, some user group, and then they see the data. So it's, for me, completely transparent.
Got it.
Me as a data analyst, I do not have to care about this exposure of data, unless I take a screenshot and send it around, for sure. But this is something where everyone should know. If you take a screenshot from a program, and then the security chain is broken. But
Oh, that makes sense. Actually, yeah, that is convenient. So you're not even worried about it. You're like, you
yeah,
have certain people that have access to it, and if you don't, then you have to talk to admin and get that access. But meanwhile, as a data analyst, you don't even think about that. You're just like slinging your insights and you're sharing it wherever you can. And if there's a problem downstream, then it'll get flagged. But I kind of like that too, because one less thing to worry about, right? You want to just focus on your job,
exactly,
which is generating insights.
exactly. So,
Very neat. And then we talked about this object layer, the ontology. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What's the effect of that? What, like, you as an analyst, what do you get from having that as a feature within the Palantir Foundry platform?
mm, what during the data wrangling process, at least in my area, it didn't help me in the preparation of the data, because at this level I'm still really on this table field level. What gives you, where some really some interesting power kicks in. So I had some magic moments. I had in the book this one thing where I put the objects in an area onto a map, and then it was just a cloud of events. Sighting here, sighting of a point, a track point here, track point there, a track point. And I was able to just visualize and color them a little bit. And then it became obvious that I had 2 tracks of activities in my area. And then having an identity and some attributes and methods on this object, it was really easy to say the methods that I defined on the objects in before, I was able to apply them to objects in a totally different context inside of the Foundry. So you can select by time, by area, by whatever, and then you click on the things, and their object, they know what they can do, and then you can harvest and benefit from all the functions that you defined in before on the object level. And so you, in this way, the ontology helps me that I define a function, a business function once on an object, and this can be executed over all the platform. And this is something which is really really nice, because when you do a SQL state and select, then the data loses usually its context when you're just on the SQL layer. And when you're on an object-oriented layer and you maybe toppling or something like this, and you have this clever object relational mapping, then it might get as well hard to work with the tables below and keep this consistent. And this is something where the ontology really is a cool thing, cool object layer. Thinking of the origin of the term ontology, the science of being, Old Greek, then it has this overall holistic approach, which can be tricky, especially when you're in big companies where you where the idea to say, yeah. So
We are live, folks. We're live. That's a test.
But I know someone is caring about the ringing of the bell. So the larger the company gets and the more segregated the company gets, the harder it will be to maintain the idea of this ontology as a one and only thing. So to say, this is one event, and this is inside of our ontology. There's only one object with the name event and the semantics of event. The larger the company gets, the more tricky it will be to keep this unique idea of an ontology where one object is only one and only one and only one. So I'm rather fond of this idea of this data mesh, this domain data product. I don't know whether you read the book of Zamat Dem, it's hard to pronounce, this data mesh, which is currently really Zamat Demghani, I think it's, and so it's something where the ontology moves, in my perspective, rather from the ontology as this holy science of being, rather to a very clever object layer, where you try to keep things together, but not in the sense of being dogmatic, say the Highlander approach. In larger companies, there are tons of Highlanders, everyone raising a sword, there can be only one.
Right.
And yeah. So
that makes sense. So the idea there is that it just makes it easier for you to unlock specific features within the platform, more straightforward, right? So you know kind of what attributes you need to unlock all of the event capabilities within Foundry. So if you want to map something, if you want to create a geofence, for example, like if you're in transportation and you want to be alerted when something exits a geofence, then you know what the object is for that and what you need for that. So you just can map that to your data, and then boom, you get access to all these new functionalities, the map, the geofence, the alerts. You don't have to go and code that out yourself. And once it's done for you and your department, the chances are that it's going to be similar for another department, and they have access to that object now. Like, oh, I'm going to use Kai's event object here. I'm just going to give it the requirements that it needs, and then boom, now I have access to all those different functionalities as well. I don't have to code that up from scratch. I could just turn it on, so to speak.
Yes, unless it's only a larger set of requirements that we have, then it can be extended.
Yes.
when you have competing or conflicting requirements, you might end up in a copy. But yes, you're right. It's a good way of reusing thing.
And aside from events and maps, any other objects that come to mind that are interesting?
So in the digital area, you have typical events like the event, then the actor, the location, you have the activity itself. You need a sort of normed activity. So when you say a GSM call, for example, this is an act of communication, bidirectional. It's somehow wireless. And then you usually classify activities to make them comparable. Because when you for example, when you think of higher level insights, to say look at your geofencing thing, when you say there's one event, leave the geo area, enter the geo area, leave and enter. And by some insight, you know when the sequence of these 4 events happen within 5 minutes, someone's circling around. And then with the Foundry, it's relatively easy to set a simple analysis. You go sort the events of one actor by a timeline, create a pattern, enter, exit, as a simple string pattern. You can collect the data through some window functions. And then you have a regular expression, for example, which looks to repetition of enter, exit, enter, exit. And when you detect this repetition, you form a new event circling at the border. And you put this again into the event database with the actor that we have before, but the activity circling. And then you can step by step pile up and increase the level of insight, because then it's no longer an event of passing the fence, the geofence, but it's a higher level event circling on the thing. And this can give you some insight about problems at your border of activity. And yes, this is something where I dig deeper in my book to stack and increase the level of insight by creating events from events to a very high level of abstraction and insight.
Got it. Yeah, and it's all around these concepts of actors, events, and machines all kind of working together. And then if you
Exactly.
can map those out, they have different activities, and then you can stack them to higher level analysis, as you mentioned.
That's basically the W question. So when you say what, when, who, where, so what is the activity, where the location, when is the timestamp of the event, and who the actor. I'm getting yes. So it's from the W question you derive your main objects of a digital twin.
Kai, we had a question earlier here from Mo. Established companies like Microsoft and NVIDIA, they're also ramping up enterprise-wide digital twin services. Competition is pretty intense. What, in your opinion, sets Foundry apart? Anything on that?
Yes. For me, what makes what is very special about the Foundry is, on one hand, this design for data integration, for connecting data and summing up the data to build a platform for higher insight. So this is in the DNA of the Foundry, to have this idea of a data ingestion and then to combine these data. This unlocking and pulling out the data from its silos. It's a long-lived dream of every enterprise architect to have this corporate-wide database. But in many areas, this data in silos is a simple result of the purchasing process. So when you hire a subcontractor to build you an application, this subcontractor, to fulfill his contract, needs to have the control of the database. So he will ultimately require that he has his own Oracle instance, for example, or SQL Server or whatever. And then the data is there, he does his job, implements a program, but the data is in a silo. And you cannot do a join between this and that instance, or join between a SQL Server table and the Oracle server table. So you need a sort of data aggregation area where all the data comes in. And this is one of the key concepts of the Foundry, to combine all this data. What, in addition, for me, the Palantir what makes outstanding is the seamless scaling of how you can generate insight and how you can analyze. So you can pull in lots of various people into your design process. So on the lowest level, you might have some very little rule engine like the Toros, where people can have a filter to create some insights. Then you have with Contour or Quiver the next step, which is still at the level of advanced Excel people. So the clever business analysts that do their stuff in Excel, or they feel very fast familiar. And then you have the people coming from the Udacity data analyst course say, hey, I did my Python thingy. Now I want to do some data analytics. Yes, here you go. Then you have the next level with the code workbook. And then you have even more geeky people going to Foundry, to the repositories. And then people like you will find them familiar with the Foundry ML, with the machine learning area. And this scales quite seamlessly. And this makes it very interesting that you can have a participation of many people of different disciplines and skill levels into the analytics process. And this is something which is really, really fantastic. And looking at the people that large companies have, where they have offices full of Excel-wise, Excel-savvy business analysts, and you can unlock this power. And this makes is one of the aspects that makes a Foundry really standing out. Second one I would name in my top list is this thing with the pipeline, with data pipeline approach. So the story that I told about these four levels, raw data ingested, first mapping to a normalizing, then the second level to say you add some context, third level you compare it. When you turn this by 90 degrees and look from this, then you have the pipeline that you see more or less one-to-one in your data lineage inside of the Foundry. So the storytelling of how the data is processed is very well reflected in the way how these pipelines run. And so it's very easy to communicate with people to say they tell you a story. Hey, you take the sensor data. If it's like this, then it's that. If it's like that, then it's that. Then it comes from this sensor. You put a check like this on it, and then this story is quite easy to tell. And this data pipeline is talkative like a Jupyter notebook, something. You can read from top to down, and then you know how the data flows. And when you learn to read these pipelines, then you're in a similar way of knowing quite well what's happening.
That is so important because oftentimes you're not doing data science in isolation. You're doing it with a team of other data scientists and also data engineers, data analysts. So you need to be able to walk a team through all the different transformations that you did to get from raw data to insight and explain that. So if you have a platform that allows you to do that efficiently, that's going to be a huge bonus. And it's also going to help to in regards to collaboration. I really like that point too around collaboration. I think you're right. We're moving to a framework where it's not just the data scientists that are hoarding the data and coming and saying like, "Oh, I have the insights." It's like everybody is pulling from the same pool of data, and everybody's getting their sliver. Like, "Oh, I want this cut, and I want to do this, and here's my analytics." But everybody needs to have access to the same pool and do their thing, and then come back and engage and interact like that. I think that is really, really necessary. It's been a big pain point in the industry, so I'm really glad that you mentioned that.
Yes, and my experience is that the amount, the number of tables or data set that you deal with, in the end, it's relatively relatively low. So although everyone says, yeah, my special area, I have this particularity, after some point, after some evolution, you end up in dealing most of the time with the same tables because your business is usually around the typical set of information bricks, and these bricks, when they're reflected in some tables, then you simply work with them, put them on a landscape, and then everyone knows quite fast where to look for which kind of data.
Perfect. Great question. Keep these questions coming. These are amazing. Thank you very much. Okay, Kai, let's talk about the new book.
Yeah.
This just released this past month, so fresh off the presses. It's hot. It's still hot. I had a chance to go through it, got some notes. I really liked how you opened it around talking about the history of digital twins. You laid out some 7 concepts that every platform needs to have in terms of talking about digital twins. And then you pretty much go step by step in terms of setting up a digital twin from raw data to the high level visuals and alerts in the Palantir Foundry. It's very detailed. My only my only request was that I wish I would have had a Palantir Foundry instance to follow along with you on. Like I want, but I reached out to the Foundry folks, and unfortunately not available yet. So if Foundry, if you're listening, or Palantir team, if you're listening, give me a sandbox. Let me play around with this thing so we can have a better conversation around this. Open it up already. But I liked it. I like the style. Who is this for, and who should be getting this book?
Yes. I think everyone who sets up a digital twin can really gain some insights how to set it up. Especially the first for the first chapters, basically about some theory and how to set up a data strategy for setting up a digital twin. And the data strategy is as well a core element when you set up something in the Foundry, because your application design is, to a good portion, it's data design and data pipeline design. So this is something interesting, that when you set up a Foundry application, that your business logic is typically moving into the pipeline. You start to think in data streams, and no longer in iterations, and I do this in this code or in this script, but rather to say, how is my target? How can I reach my target by forming the data to reach the target? And yes, and in my book, I took this use case of the digital twin with a sub flavor of the reconnaissance area. So you get some data from various sources and combine them and lift them up to higher insights. And it's mainly around designing this event, the object event, and what you can do with this generic event. And it's not really, I took out of personal interest the reconnaissance area, but it's more or less the same when you deal with a digital twin in an industrial environment, because you have the same challenges. You have some data coming from sensors which are that are polluted with reality, and then you have to adapt, you have to fix, you have to conquer the problem that might be a sensor went out, that the time was not as expected, the value was missing, something like this. And so you have to set up a system how you can adjust and raise the things up to a higher level inside. And to illustrate as well the design process of an application development in the Foundry, I put this into chunks of iterations. Say iteration first, the foundation, the first data lineage, the first pipeline. Then I stack the object on it in the next iteration. Then I have some user stories for the third iteration, and then step by step I develop it, the final product inside of this. So on one hand, people who are interested in reconnaissance. On the other hand, people who are interested in the way how a mid-large size Foundry project can be done.
Yes, I almost feel like a solutions architect for sure, a project manager, an agile coach, a data engineer. They would all
Yes.
sort of benefit from this book. I really also like the way you set it up. It's an agile framework. You're like, hey, here's our basic plan, here's our architect, here's our architecture rather, and then here's sprint number 1, here's sprint number 2, here's sprint number 3, and just kind of go through them. And you have user stories, so you lay it out like a project manager or an agile coach would lay this out. So I really like that.
I think the agile code would love to have more problems described. So, because I skipped some of the dead ends that I went into. So when you want to transport as well knowledge about how things are set up, then it will be a waste of reading time of the reader to say, when you go over 10 to 20 pages and then end up, folks, that didn't work. Sorry for it. Wind back 20 pages. So I skipped some of the things that the agile coach will love to see,
And
but technicians will love to be circled around this dead end.
yes, yes, I like it. I highly recommend it. Kai, what is your secret? You have a 9 to 5, but you're able to crank out this book. Any techniques you want to share with the aspiring writers out there?
I have the luck that I don't need much sleep. I'm fully okay with 6 hours. And so while the rest of the family is still lying in the bed, I have some in the morning some hours where I can do this crazy stuff. So there's no big magic. And I have the luck that while building the house, the building company is really good and they don't stress me. And so I have as well some time. And my garage with my where I do some woodworking is currently not available. So I have time for writing books.
Neat. I think you talked about in the intro that you were planning originally to write a different book, right? You were just gonna write like something about one application in
Yes,
Foundry, but then it
yes,
turned into this massive
yes.
book. How did that happen?
Yes, so I wanted to look a little bit into this ontology thingy, and then the thing of the reconnaissance pipeline was something that drives me since a while. So this is something that I where I had a connection to some years ago, more decades ago, and then I thought, oh my God, this will be interesting how this will work out with the Foundry, and so I started small. I thought, okay, maybe a company with a book, and then it became that big because it became really a wild ride through all these features of the Foundry. So in the first book I wrote, this was mainly about this rather basic things like contour, fusion sheets, set up a pipeline, these basics, the foundation. And this time I was rather like looking what's in there and playing here and check, oh, this will be helpful. Does it work? Yes, cool, it works. And then it was more of this way, and it became quite big. And I was and like often when you write this kind of book, you afterwards you say, man, what did I do in this time? And other times it shrinks, so it's a little bit, yeah. I'm not used to writing, so it's only my second book, and this strange perception of what you did is a little bit irritating sometimes.
That's amazing. How long did it take you to write the book?
Mm, it was some 4 months.
4 months. That's
Yes.
amazing, man. Congratulations, Kai. Can you tell us a little bit? There's some more questions I want to get to, but before
Yes.
that, what do you want to see from the Palantir Foundry product in the next 6 months? What would be great?
Mm, there's not too much. There's one area that caused some pain in the book. It's about automation of operations in the data.
Hmm.
So this is something that was tricky to implement, and is as well tricky from from some of the principles that Palantir laid out. So they have a strong focus on ethics and being and that the data that you create that is traceable.
Mm.
And I love to have things that do more automation on the work on the data, so that you that some insights that are generated that they can be automatically put into the pool of insights. So this a little bit tricky, but in my special case, it would have been very convenient. And something else, what I like to see is the dreadful area of notification. So it's against the principle to send out mails that go out of the very controlled environmental Foundry to the completely uncontrolled area of mails. But it's so convenient.
You mean
It's so
email?
yes, email is so
Oh,
convenient. When you wake up in the morning, you get a mail. Kai, this happened in your area of interest. For sure, it's a sort of data breach, but this is something that my customers like to have,
yes.
because when they're running from building to building and check on their smartphone, sensor A is at level 42, and while running they do a call to check the next thing. This is something that where I like to see more features. And more or less. That's all. Don't have too much additional things. The set is quite complete from
Gotcha.
what I.
So some of the automation work around automating some of the insights, and then also some more controls around alerting and who gets them, so that
Yeah,
somebody can get an email of events. And having done POCs in the past, that was typically one of the easiest way to share the insights from the POC with the whole group of people, right? From
yes,
engineers to operators. So I think you need something like that.
yes.
Um, Very neat. So I think I want to get to a couple more questions here if we have
Yeah.
time. So let's see. Do you feel that Foundry will be widely adopted based on your experience, or is it more of a niche solution? What technologies or existing platform does Foundry displace?
I will. I expect that it will be wider adopted. Nevertheless, it's a big thing. So it's not like you buy a PC and then you hit up the setup Excel to run the Palantir to set up a Foundry. It's really a larger environment. This doesn't make things not always easier. So imagine you want to transport a bottle of wine from your house to the neighbor, and you have the chance to put it on your bike, cycle the 100 meters, and then deliver. This is not the Foundry. The Foundry is that you ask for a van, the van comes up, it lowers the loading platform, you put the bottle of wine on it, the van up lifts the platform up, goes to your
Right.
neighbor, and the platform goes down because it's.
Shuts down the street. Puts the cones around it. Like it's a whole process. It's a
Yes,
big process.
and
Saying.
and you ask why does it take 10 minutes to deliver 2 bottles of wine? With my bike, I would have been faster. But on the other hand, when you do not have 2 bottles of wine, but a fridge, a washing machine, a dish machine, then the same van will come up and will deliver this as well in 10 minutes. And then you think, oh, this is amazingly fast.
Right.
And and to this capability of really dealing with huge amount of data. So we have the saying that when you reach 100 million of rows, it's getting interesting. Below, it's negligible. Um, then this is something which just needs some power and which needs a bigger setup. And so this is not the thing where you as many say I want to have a sandbox. Then the Palantir people, they do not need just to buy another PC, put it into a server room, and say this is Manny's PC. This is not the case. It's a great big system, great as well, but it's as well a big system, and so it needs some not, sort of frame and sheer capacity.
Yeah.
Um, what does it displace? I can imagine that some yes, we have competitors in the area for sure. There's analytics clouds for visualization. We have front ends like Spotfire, like ClickSense, like SQL, and then Microsoft area. It's a sort of decision of the company which way to go. Mm, I don't know whether it's really when you replace one server by a server farm, then it's not really one-to-one replacement because you replace something which is small and has a very targeted area by a sort of infrastructure. And this is something that's what I see, that the Foundry, when it's depending on how it's deployed, becomes really some infrastructure. So like a little bit like Excel on steroids. Um, that and when you say which program do you replace when you start to use Excel? Yes.
Got it. We're coming up on time. We have a couple more minutes. Kai, what is
Yes.
next for you? What books you got? You're working on now. What do you think you're going to be working on? Your next
Currently,
project.
I have no book that I'm working on. I have one area of expertise. It's Slate. What this is one of the UI parts of applications of Foundry, where I'm a sort of really advanced. But I don't know whether this will find a market. Will be just fun for me. That's all, everything I do. I just do it for fun. So currently, I have no concrete plans. Let's see what
Got
comes.
it. Oh, okay. Very neat. So in closing, I would say definitely check out Kai's new book. You can find it on Amazon. I'll include a link to the book in my show notes and in the replay of this video. Get it and do me a favor. Please give Kai a review on Amazon. I know I've interviewed a couple of authors, and that's a big deal for authors. So leave a review, preferably 4 stars or 5, and do that for Kai, who is doing this from in 5 to 12 o'clock at night. He's working hard to get these books out to you. So I think the least we can do is drop him a nice review on Amazon. Kai, any last thoughts? Any last or tell people where they can find you. How can people connect with you? How can people stay up to date on what you're doing?
I think that the best source will be my LinkedIn profile. So this is where I post any news which has come. There's a contact data. You can chat me, and yes, this will be the best source of contact. So I think yes. And last words. Yeah, it was a pleasure. It was really fun. Thanks, Manny, for inviting me to me to your show. It was fun and pleasure to talk to you. And yes.
Likewise, I'm gonna end the stream now, but stay on and we'll have a little chat afterwards. Okay.
Okay.
With that, hey, thanks everybody for coming on. Thanks for all the great questions. I really appreciate that. Replay will be available soon, and I'll also include show notes, links to things that we talked about. I'll include a link to the book. I'll include a link to Kai's LinkedIn profile, so you can follow him there. And if you have any other ideas for future shows, feel free to reach out to me. And don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. All right, thank you everybody. Have a great day. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.